Welcome to another episode of A Poet Reads to Write. Today I would like to take part in 2 booktube tags. I'm just loving these tags. I think I've already said this, but when I first started booktube I really didn't think I was going to take part in tags. But I'm just finding this whole process so warm and welcoming. I'm just really enjoying the generosity and the openness of the booktube community, and being tagged to take part in these things I'm finding absolutely riveting, and I can't keep away from them. So today I'm going to take part in 2 tags. The first tag is called the Bookish Question and Answer, and it was created by @Libib, and I was tagged to do this by C. Gregory from CG Rated Books. It's a great pun there, isn't there? Almost has a bit of adult naughtiness about it, but CG Rated Books. C. Gregory is just fantastic. Summarises so much of what I feel about booktube. Just his affable, warm, welcoming tone in all his videos. And he also often reviews things that I don't necessarily feel apart from through him drawn to read. So I'm learning so much about contemporary writing and other types of literature and genres, because I mainly read, obviously poetry. I'm not only Australian poetry, but world poetry as well. And there's just so much being published that it takes a lot of time to try and keep up to date with the burgeoning contemporary world poetry scene. So I don't read a lot outside of poetry, or that's how I sometimes feel. I read as much philosophy as I can. I love history. I love memoir, biography, autobiography. But I am very much focused on that poetry. Oh, I love fantasy, of course. I've said that many times. But poetry really is what keeps me going. So that's the first tag I'm going to take part into today. The next tag that I'm going to take part in is the Let Me Introduce You tag. And this was created by Melinda at A Web of Stories. What a great channel handle. And I was tagged in for this particular tag by Arron Hook of Arron James Hook. And he's another fantastic, just like C. Gregory. Arron is another terrific, really open, generous, warm person. And again, like C. Gregory, often reviews and recommends books that are very new to me. A lot of thrillers, detective, murder, mystery, all sorts of things that I hardly ever read. And when I listen to people like C. Gregory and Arron review things like this, it makes me realise what I'm missing out on. So one of the great thrills about booktube for me is being opened up to genres and new writers and new ways of being in the world. I'm just really enjoying it. So let's get straight into it so this video doesn't get too long. So my first booktube tag, the Bookish Q&A, that I was tagged in by C. Gregory, and I thank him so much for that. The first prompt, and there are 7 of these, so I'll get straight into it. The first prompt is, how many books in a series is too many? As I've just said, I mainly read poetry, so poetry doesn't often get tended to read, written in series. But I do read a lot of fantasy. I don't read any science fiction, which often also come in a series. Fantasy, of course, is the genre, I suppose, going back to Tolkien, isn't it? That really developed this whole thing of everything has to be in a series, and usually a series comes in 3 or 4. Tolkien set the tone, didn't he, of having a series in 3, even though he imagined Lord of the Rings as actually only being 1 book. But it is usually published, isn't it, as 3 volumes. And that's become, in a sense, the norm, the touchstone of other fantasy science fiction writers, all going back to Tolkien. And everything now has to be a multi-volume thing. How many is too many? I don't know. I guess that would depend on the writer, wouldn't it? How grand their vision is and how successful they are at keeping the reader's interest, at making the whole thing engaging. I certainly don't think Lord of the Rings is too long. If anything, my criticism is that it's a bit short. I would like more digressions. The world of Tom Bombadil. Oh my goodness. If only we could have had another whole book with that digression. you know, the whole thing of Tom Bombadil and just magical. So I would love Lord of the Rings to actually be longer. While we're talking about Lord of the Rings, I mentioned in my last video about some of my favourite books and the ones that, you know, my really old copies that I no longer read because they are literally falling apart. Recently, the Folio Society has brought out these matching beautiful editions. So here's The Hobbit. You get this beautiful, almost like a Celtic Anglo-Saxon type swirling design on the front. The Hobbit, of course, has that little picture of Smaug, and the black with the red is just beautiful. I just love the design of these. There's a real simplicity for these. Like everything with Folio, you know, they're hardback books that just open perfectly in the hand. These books come with very simple, just black and white, just simple drawn illustrations. There's no colour in the illustrations at all. But I really quite like the illustrations. It took me a little bit of time maybe to really tune my eye to them. To begin with, maybe they almost felt a bit comic book type. But the more I look at them, more time I spend them, I can see there's actually a bit more influenced by maybe that, you know, classic woodcut type style. And I'm really enjoying them. You can see the beautiful front faces, the beautiful font, everything you get with Folio. You know, the front piece is just a beautiful, simple map. And that's what you have. Every chapter begins with this beautiful font again, and a simple, as I said, a simple hand-drawn black and white type illustration in black ink. I really quite like this. The more time I spend with these, the more I love them. So I decided to spend up big with this, and I got the whole set. So I bought The Hobbit, and then I bought the Silmarillion, which is, again, as you can see, this beautiful matching, going back to the tradition, I suppose, almost sort of that Anglo-Saxon Norse origins of Tolkien's universe. Here you've got this beautiful, it's almost like a longboat from the straight out of that Viking world. The Silmarillion has got blue with, again, this gold matching foil, and the illustrations are by the same person. So you've got the simple ink-drawn illustrations to go with this, and I just love that matching set. They look beautiful on the bookshelf, and everything just opens so beautifully. Same type of thing with the Lord of the Rings. It's the same simple design. The beautiful focal image on the front, the lovely gold foil swirling design with that real echo to sort of a Celtic or Anglo-Saxon design. Here you've got, again, of course, the two towers, so you've got one of the towers. The Fellowship of the Ring, of course, is, oh, I guess that's actually quite ominous. I suppose it's actually one of the Black Riders. It almost looks like it's a very grand image. I'm wondering whether it's maybe even more to do maybe with Gandalf or maybe even Aragorn. There's a real nobility about that image that I don't really think is to do with the Black Riders. And then, of course, on this one, the final one, the Return of the King, you got the beautiful image of Mount Doom. So I bought those. I was really lucky when this came out, because at the same time Folio had done a limited edition, deluxe edition of The Lord of the Rings, and oh, I'm not sure how much money that was. It was you needed a pretty good sack full of cash to buy that, and I'd struggled with that for a month or so, and I really wanted it. I've shared before just how important Lord of the Rings is in the origins of my adventure into reading. But I was really pleased in retrospect that when these came out, I decided I just wanted everything in a beautiful matching set. So I got the Lord of the Rings, the Hobbit, and the Silmarillion, and these were just their basic editions, so they're much cheaper. And I think they're just beautiful. They look lovely on the bookshelves, for example. Some other fantasy, like here's a fantasy that I always return to. This is by Susan Cooper, and this is the Dark is Rising sequence. This is set in modern day Cornwall, and it's a retelling of the Arthurian mythology. So you can see here, this is a set that's got 5 in the series, and again, you know, I would have loved it if she had have written 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 if it had have kept going. I try and return to the Susan Cooper Dark is Rising stuff, certainly every 5 years or so. Sometimes I read them more frequently than that. I just love the Susan Coopers. I originally had them in a very cheap, simple paperback editions, which really fell apart through rereading. So a couple of years ago now, I decided to upgrade my Susan Coopers, and I was able to get these beautiful matching editions. They're hardback, and they've got, you know, they're quite naive, simple illustrations, but it's a lovely use of colour. They're lovely covers, and they're all matching. And the other beautiful thing about these is they're hardback books, and they're, you know, quite cheap books. They weren't expensive at all, but they open beautifully in the hand. These are just lovely. It's quite cheap paper. It's not the beautiful Abbey Wove paper that you get in Folio, of course, but it's lovely. And they open up beautifully, so these are going to last the distance. And having all 5 books in these beautiful matching illustrations is just lovely. So I return to these regularly. So I'm certainly not just happy that there are 5 in this edition. If anything, as I said, just with Lord of the Rings, I would love it if they were longer. Give me more. Give me more. The next prompt, hardback or paperback? Well, I've started to introduce this idea. For me, of course, it depends completely on the production qualities of the book. A few years ago, Madeline Miller brought out this incredible Song of Achilles, which is a retelling of part of the Trojan War through the eyes of just this particular Achilles and Patroclus, his lover. And this is a beautiful story. I've always loved the Madeline Miller book. So when I initially had this in a simple paperback edition. When this beautiful hardback came out, I couldn't resist it because it looked so beautiful online. As I said in my last video, I can't go to bookshops anymore because I don't go anywhere where I can't take Billy. So all my book purchases over the last couple of years and now are online. So I couldn't see this, and when I saw it online, it looked fantastic. Look at that beautiful cover, the beautiful sky blue with the arches, the arch and the arrow in the front, and the beautiful gold leaves. I think it's quite startling. But when I got this book, and the first time I tried to open it, of course, I realized the binding is just terrible. There's no stitching. It's all just very cheaply glued. And I don't think I would ever be able to read this book without cracking and ruining the spine. So I've decided now, because it is such a beautiful thing, I'm never going to read this edition having bought it. I will just keep this and keep it beautiful like this. It's a beautiful book that I can then pass down to my kids and grandkids after I've gone. I was really lucky. A few months ago, maybe 6 months ago, Folio Society brought out their own edition of the Madeline Miller, The Song of Achilles. And so I just decided, even though I already had a softback edition and that hardback edition which looks beautiful but is actually not practical to read, I decided to spend up and buy this. This is a simple edition. It's not the limited signed edition or anything like that, so it wasn't too badly priced. And I decided to buy it. You can see the beautiful cover here of Achilles and a Patroclus. Like everything with Folio, it just opens so well in the hand. There's no, this is a simple edition, so there's no interesting end papers. But the whole thing is illustrated with some beautiful black and white type illustrations done by Julie Dillon again, who Folio Society have employed quite a few times to illustrate particular works. And this particular, the Folio Society edition of Madeline Miller's novel, is introduced by Emily Wilson, who's done those new verse translations of Homer that so many of us are very excited about. Emily Wilson, Arron, she just interviews so well. She's such an enthusiast for classical Greek literature, and she loves to share, and she interviews really well. So I'm a huge fan of Emily Wilson. So she wrote the introduction to this Madeline Miller book. And you can see it's lovely illustration. There are also a lot of beautiful colour plates as well throughout the book, like that. Look at that marvellous image of Patroclus and Achilles. Wow. And you've got the beautiful gold foil at the top, and everything about these books. I get really excited when I have a Folio Society book in my hand. So, if it's an edition like this, for me, every day of the week, hardback, please. These are books to treasure, to hand pass down the line after you've gone. And I really like that idea of a book as cultural artifact. I don't like the idea of, folding back pages and being rough with books. That real consumer type thing where you read a book once and then I suppose some people just almost discard it because it's so damaged and spoiled with the spine, with folding back of pages and all that sort of thing. I really like the idea of a book as cultural artifact, something to be cherished. And I love that idea, that medieval idea when, before the printing press, when books were great treasured items because they were all, of course, hand calligraphied, handwritten, and they really were works of art to be cherished. And I love looking at books still in that very same light. This makes me feel a little bit like that medieval monk with this treasured, hand-copied, drawn book. I love holding a book like this. But then, of course, you get sometimes some paperbacks, don't you? Here's Arundhati Roy, an Indian writer who I just love. These are simple paperback editions of her two novels, The God of Small Things and The Ministry of Utmost Happiness. And these, they're lovely covers. They're only simple, cheap paperbacks, but they're lovely covers, particularly The God of Small Things. And these being paperback, they open beautifully in the hand. So reading these is a great reading experience. You can keep things moving along nicely. And as you can see, I've read these quite a few times and they're still in mint condition. So they're beautifully put together. So when a paperback is done so well like this, paperback is fine, isn't it? You can see over here I've got all my black Penguin classics. I love paperback books. When they open beautifully in the hand like this, they're much better, aren't they, than a hardback book like this, for example, that looks fantastic and sucks you in and takes your cash. But in actual fact, this is not a book that you can read. It's just impossible to open. It's just really cheap, glued together. And if you read this and open it up so you could actually read the pages, you would crack the spine and ruin the book. So I would much prefer a paperback book to this any day. But if I could have Folio Society cloth-bound hardbacks, wow! But of course, that's a money issue, isn't it? And often we can only have the money for paperbacks. My most recent DNF. This is not a DNF, but it is a book that for some reason I'm struggling with. I started reading, this is again another Folio Society edition. This is The Buried Giant, and it's by, of course, Kazuo Ishiguro, and it's illustrated by Jana Heidersdorf. And I've got on Booktube, there's an interview with Jana Heidersdorf talking about her illustration of this, and she's a very young illustrator. And just her excitement in this interview when she's talking about how she couldn't believe her luck when the Folio Society came knocking and, employed her to do the illustrations for this edition. And I think she's done a magical job. Look at that cover. It's just majestic. And this is a book that has beautiful end paper. It's just that lovely swirling of the mist. I won't say too much about it because I don't want to spoil it if you want to read it yourself. But mist and this swirling mist is a really important part of this book. It's a book that is dealing with the trauma of war, the legacy of war. And it is a book about forgetting and about maybe the place of forgetting in how to deal with trauma and war legacy. It's a very interesting book about reconciliation, truth-telling, who has the right to tell. It's very interesting. Jana Heidersdorf, look at these illustrations. Full colour, beautiful illustrations. She's done a majestic job. And will never forget that interview on Booktube with her when she's so wondrously sharing her enthusiasm and just absolute abundant joy that she had this opportunity to illustrate this beautiful book. And Ishiguro, his writing is just delectable. I'm really enjoying the book. It's slow moving, but it is very beautiful, and it's a really quiet meditation on character. In particular, this old married couple who are in a sense the real focus of the whole story. They are joined by other people as well. In many ways, this old couple go on a type of pilgrimage. And, you know, like with Chaucer, the Canterbury Tales, it's a pilgrimage that in a sense attracts fellow travellers. So there are these minor characters as well. But the thing is really focused on this old married couple. It's a beautiful story. Slow moving, but a beautiful story in the way it's evoking these two characters. I'm about 2/3 of the way through the book, I guess. I started this book about 2 months ago, and I'm just really struggling to finish it. I don't know why. I'm really enjoying it. It's largely because I think I'm getting, you know, so hooked on BookTube, and I'm reading all the things and, you know, preparing videos and then loading videos and then watching other people's BookTubes, and oh boy. So I've promised myself that I will finish reading this tonight as I load this video. So we'll see how we go. Hopefully this will not be a permanent did not finish. I'm really enjoying it. It's a beautiful book, The Buried Giant. So I will get back to this and finish it tonight while I load this video. And then you can see the book comes with this beautiful slipcase, again illustrated by Jana Heidersdorf, and you can see the beautiful, again, that matching swirl of this mist and the medieval warrior with the drawn sword. And then you've got, again, the warriors with, again, this pilgrimage, and that would be my old married couple. It's just so well put together. I am really looking forward to finishing it. So it will not be a do not finish for long, I hope. A book you can always reread. Well, as I've said, you know, poetry is what I really come back to, and I can always reread good poetry, and I'm going to share some of that with you soon. Poetry is one thing I do often return to. In terms of fantasy reading, you know, I've shared many times The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings. I wouldn't return all that often to the Silmarillion. You know, it really is, isn't it? That quirky Tolkien, that finicky, could never finish anything because he was such a perfectionist. You know, he started parts of the Silmarillion literally before World War I, and when he passed away in 1973, it still wasn't finished, and it was edited and put together by his son, Christopher Tolkien, basically after he had passed away in 1973. But yeah, I don't usually return to the Silmarillion. I read it every so often, but I would only read it once every 20 years or so, probably, to be honest. The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings I try and return to every 2 or 3 years for old time's sake. You know, that really is the origins of my reading quest, so I can always return to them. Likewise, the Susan Cooper. These Dark is Rising sequence, I would try and return to these every 2 or 3 years. Certainly every 5 years I would read the whole Susan Cooper Dark is Rising. As I said, this is very much set in modern day Cornwall. It's a retelling of the Arthurian world. And there's a character in here, Great Uncle Gummery, who is a sort of a version of Merlin, the wizard, the magician. And in this partaking, Great Uncle Gummery is sort of a mixture of Doctor Who with Indiana Jones. It's just majestic. I just love it. I just love everything about this. I haven't read some of Susan Cooper's other work, but I return to this time and time again. I've written some ekphrastic poetry about the Susan Coopers in my current work, and my current collection of poetry called Cactus. And I've done a couple of ekphrastic poems about this sequence and about the whole myth, the legend of Arthur, particularly in that Cornwall setting. So I love these things, and I can always return to certain fantasy like that. One point of view or multiple? This is an interesting question, isn't it? Fantasy, I guess in origins, was often a single point of view. And again, we go back to Tolkien, don't we? Not only do we credit Tolkien with being the originator, possibly, of the whole multi-volume universe that he created in terms of this fantasy tradition, but he also was one of the first to, in that great story of Lord of the Rings, you have multiple storylines running parallel to one another. So you have multiple points of view. This is another real Tolkien innovation to the world of fantasy. And now I think, many fantasy, much contemporary fantasy, is in multi-volume approach, and it is in a multiple point of view. And I think a lot of this goes back to the influence, the magnetic influence that Tolkien still has on contemporary fantasy. So, I guess for me, it's probably a multiple point of view. I also love at times, though, reading short stories and a novella. I love it. A really beautifully written novella is just majestic. And I guess novellas and short stories are probably more typically a single point of view because of that more condensed, compressed space. But if you've got this expansive fantasy-type multi-volume universe, yes, I think I would love a multiple point of view. My least favourite book. My goodness, when I first read this, I really didn't know how I was going to handle this. I didn't think I had any least favourite books. But yes, I guess we all do, don't we? I've said in a previous universe I would never read anything, for example, by Trump or by the Christian right. So I guess anything in that milieu would be a least favourite for me. But when I was thinking about this, I have also, as an adult, had a roller coaster relationship with C.S. Lewis. As a young adult, discovering that, Christians could smoke and drink alcohol and they could have fellowship with one another in a pub. Oh my goodness, that just blew my mind. So as a young Christian adult in that evangelical Protestant tradition, I loved the Inklings. They really excited me. And of course, I suppose the inkling that really held the whole thing together, that was in a sense at the centre of the whole thing, was C.S. Lewis. And I went through a stage where I owned everything that he wrote. And I used to love not only the fantasy, I tried the science fiction. I wasn't all that drawn to the science fiction, but I did have copies and I tried to read it a few times. I loved Narnia to begin with. And then, of course, I've read all his supposedly theological work. I don't think he was a theologian, let's be honest. He was a religious communicator, a religious writer, that's for sure. And very successful, very popular. And, all good to him. But he was not a theologian in the sense that he read theology and really engaged deeply with theological questions and wanted to contribute his own voice to that theological milieu. He read almost no theology. Certainly nothing that was progressive or centre of left of centre, sorry. So I guess, as I said, I've had a real roller coaster relationship with Lewis. I went from loving him to, I suppose I went through a stage where almost any book by C.S. Lewis probably would have been a least favourite. Now I'm coming back again and softening once again, which is lovely. For me, one of the things that really got me with C.S. Lewis was discovering Elizabeth Anscombe, that majestic mid-20th century English philosopher in that English language analytic tradition. And Elizabeth Anscombe, as well as being a very traditional Catholic, convert to Catholicism actually, but she was also the first great communicator and translator of Wittgenstein into English. So she's a very important mid-20th century philosopher in her own right. And of course, there was one meeting between Anscombe and Lewis in the Socratic Club at Oxford University in the mid-20th century. And Elizabeth Anscombe just completely demolished Lewis. And Lewis realised in that meeting, in that encounter with Elizabeth Anscombe, that he was not a philosopher, he was not a theologian, and he was venturing into ideas and on ground that he really didn't have that much right to venture into, particularly with the sort of bullying certainty that Lewis often, I think, held on to and displayed in these meetings of the Socratic Club. And he realised in that meeting with Elizabeth Anscombe that his whole theological system was built on sand and it was not very sound at all. And after that encounter, he never wrote any more theology. And I think that's very telling. Christians today, certain Protestant Christians today, still talk about Lewis as though he was one of the greatest minds of the 20th century. And it's just absolute nonsense. Lewis has his place. Definitely he has his place. And as an older person now, I am returning to Lewis and my heart is once again a little bit softening towards him. But he did have a certain bullying certainty that was misplaced. So yeah, a lot of Lewis's theological or religious works would certainly be least favourite books for me. One of my problems with the Inklings, of course, was when I read very deeply when I was at Sydney University and bringing history and philosophy together. I read a lot in British labour leaders and social theorists, and one of the people that was thrown up to me while I was engaging with all this, British labour theory and history was a English poet, mid-20th century English poet, early middle 20th century, called Roy Campbell, and he was also a sympathiser with fascism. So he was quite a disagreeable, like Ezra Pound. He's not a person who I would have ever wanted to have met or rubbed shoulders with. And Roy Campbell, because he took the wrong side, Franco's side in the Spanish Civil War, and he actually helped fight for Franco, and he really was, like Pound, a real sympathiser with fascism. But because he was also a very conservative, traditional Catholic, he was a great darling by many members of the Inklings, particularly Lewis and Tolkien. They really loved Roy Campbell, and that's what really started to nudge me away from the Inklings. And I really began to feel very unsettled and very unsure about reading them. So apart from The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, I sort of moved for a long time right away from the Inklings altogether. They definitely became least favourites for me. As I've said, I have started to try and become a little bit softer, and one of the things I've realised, by reading that great Wilson biography of C.S. Lewis, for example, is that, unlike Tolkien, who could be a very intolerant Christian, and, one of the reasons he fell out with Lewis was that Lewis married a divorcee, and Tolkien just couldn't cope with that. He was very intolerant, I think, very unaccepting, not open at all. Lewis, who you imagine would have been much more about bigoted certainties, that Northern Irish Protestant, he was actually quite different. And it's one of the things that I've enjoyed discovering, and it's helped me to become a little bit softer towards Lewis. That, yes, in some of his religious writing, he does come across as being very sure of himself and quite bullying and hectoring. I don't like his tone of voice at all. But in life, Lewis does seem to have been much more open and welcoming of other and of difference than, for example, Tolkien. So someone like Charles Williams, who Tolkien really, I think, quite disliked. He saw Charles Williams as a bit of a witch doctor. And of course, Charles Williams, it's true in his theology and in his thinking, he did range between Orthodox Christianity and a lot of occult practice. And he was a member of different occult groups. Charles Williams was a very interesting character. So certainly he rubbed someone like Tolkien the wrong way. But Lewis was so accepting of Charles Williams. He read these books, he knew what Charles Williams' ideas were, very different to his own, but he was very accepting of Charles Williams. He just adored Charles Williams. Lewis was the same with Owen Barfield, that great philosopher of consciousness, particularly from a sort of a Rudolf Steiner point of view. Lewis, again, probably felt that he had contrary points of view to Owen Barfield on almost every subject, apart from the fact that they were both still Christians. But the way they expressed and lived their Christian faith was quite contrary to one another. But Lewis also loved and adored Owen Barfield. So he could put difference aside and be a little more open and welcoming than, for example, Tolkien. And discovering this in that great biography of Lewis by Wilson, I have been able to slowly soften and come back a little bit to C.S. Lewis. And I've spent a little bit of time recently reading his lovely religious work, a very short work, A Grief Observed, a little meditation on bereavement after his wife, Joy Davidson, passed away from cancer. So that's interesting. The final prompt in this particular tag is, can you listen to music while reading? It depends what I'm reading, of course. If I'm reading poetry or anything where you really need to have your ear attuned to the rhythms and the nuances of the language, absolutely not. I can't listen to music at all, even vocal music. But if I'm reading a book that's more about the ideas or about the content of the writing, and I'm not trying to really listen so much to the actual nuance and the rhythm of the language, well then yes, I often will read those sorts of books and do research while I'm listening to music. I've found I can't listen to any music that has a voice to it. But instrumental music, a great symphony, certain American bluegrass, but certainly great symphonies I can listen to while I do research and while I'm reading those sorts of books. So yeah, for sure. So that's that tag, the Bookish Q&A tag that I was tagged to participate in by that wonderful C. Gregory. I've really enjoyed following C. Gregory's Booktube channel. I really recommend, if you're not a subscriber, I really recommend you check it out. It's great. He's really warm, very welcoming, and he reviews such interesting and disparate books, things that are often very new to me, and they really draw me in, and I've discovered some real gems through my subscription to his website. So I would really recommend that site. The next tag I'm going to take part in is the Let Me Introduce You tag. This was a tag, as I said before, that was created by Melinda at A Web of Stories, and I was tagged by Arron Hook. And Arron, again, is in Britain. C. Gregory is in the US, and Arron Hook is in the UK. And he's another young bloke who's just fantastic. Reviews very different things from me. A lot of thrillers and detective type stuff. It's books that I'm really being drawn to, and again, he's introduced me to some wonderful gems. So I'm really enjoying my bookish connection with Arron and really enjoying following him. So again, if you're looking for some subscriptions, something that you might like to discover, I would really recommend C. Gregory and Arron Hook. So this particular tag is only divided up into 4 areas. Let Me Introduce You tag. The first tag, or the first part of this tag, is who am I going to introduce you to, who are they, and why did I choose them? I thought for this I might choose a sort of a mid-late 20th century, more mid-20th century American poet, William Stafford. He's a voice that really makes me miss the Christianity of my young years and my young adult years. He's a Christian voice, a Protestant voice, but I suspect quite a progressive voice. He's a voice unlike C.S. Lewis, who was very much concerned with certainties and, being sure of everything, far too sure for my liking. This is a person who was able to ask questions and live with difficult questions, and to understand that not every question actually can be answered. For example, one of the things that I love about William Stafford, like with Bertrand Russell, that wonderful English analytic philosopher from the United Kingdom, and there's a New Zealand poet, James K. Baxter, who again I just adore. These are 3 men who put their ideas, their commitment to things first, and instead of go to war, in World War II, they were actually, for Bertrand Russell it was World War I, but for Baxter and Stafford it was World War II. They were very committed pacifists, and they would not compromise that faith. And particularly, not so much for Baxter, or for Russell, of course, they were not Christian at all, but Stafford, he was a committed pacifist because of his Christian faith. He took the 10 Commandments seriously. Thou shalt not kill. I don't know how he read all that other stuff in the Hebrew Bible about genocide and, the justifications that are in the Hebrew Bible for genocide when it comes to conquering the promised land, etc. But anyway, he remained a strong Christian throughout his whole life. And as I said, he was a pacifist because of his Christianity. And he was willing to go to jail for that. Bertrand Russell went to jail during World War I when he refused to fight. And Baxter also was detained. So I love these sort of people, and particularly William Stafford. He really makes me pine for my Christian origins, for a Christian belief that can rest with difficult questions that don't necessarily have to have sure answers. I find him a really, really attractive voice to spend time with. I would try to return to William Stafford every 5 or 10 years I would return to him. I think he has a lot to say to me, and for me, Stafford reminds me to be a little bit more humble. Because I am such a passionate person, I can come across as being very proud, I think, and haughty, and too sure of my own points of view and convictions and judgment on things. And, I don't mean to come across that way, but I know I do. And William Stafford always reminds me to go away from conflict, away from drama, and to be a lot more open and a lot more humble. There's a lot about William Stafford that really underscores the great value of humility, of being a little bit quiet, of just listening to people, and then quietly talking to them about maybe a contrary point of view on an issue. Don't rush in with a loud, booming voice and try and take the stage and force people into your own certainties. William Stafford is really good for me to read. Someone who I just love. He's a great reminder to be a little less sure of myself. I have never bought as much William Stafford as I should. I've got here on the William Stafford, The Worth of Local Things. This is a collection edited by Tom Andrews, and it's a collection of essays and reviews on the whole career of William Stafford that came out after William Stafford had passed away. And then I bought this book. This is just on the early poems of William Stafford. So it's just a very it's an interesting sort of book on where William Stafford came from. And it's a lovely book called Another World Instead. And that is one of the things, as I've just said, that William Stafford really shines for me. He really shows me different ways of being in the world. And, he makes me pine for the Christianity of my young adult years. This is a beautiful book. This is a book actually that was written again after William Stafford passed away. It's a book that was written by his son, by Kim Stafford, who was also a poet and creative writing teacher in the university system in the United States. This is a wonderful book. Being an old fella myself with 4 adult kids, this is the sort of book, this is the sort of way that you would wish all of your children would see you. This is a wonderful, loving memoir, a very intimate memoir, a portrait of family, of growing up in a family, and the love that this son, Kim, had for his father, his dad, William. It's a beautiful book about love, a memoir of love and family, familial love. It's a beautiful book. Yes, it does go a little bit over to the hagiographic. It does paint a portrait of Dad that is very saintly. And I'm pretty damn sure that, he wasn't saintly in everything. None of us are we? We all know brokenness as well as the good bits. So yes, this is hagiography to some extent, but it is a beautiful thing. I really enjoy reading this, and I love that expression of love from an adult son for their father. I just love that. That is what we all cherish and would most hope for, isn't it, in life? To be so remembered and celebrated and cherished by your adult children after you've gone. This is a lovely book to read. There's a lovely little bit in here that I thought I might read. This is a little bit by William Stafford, quoted in this book by Kim, his son. And it's actually called Writing the Australian Crawl. Being an Australian poet, I couldn't resist. But this is a little statement that William Stafford wrote about his own writing practice. Listen to this. A writer is not so much someone who has something to say, as he is someone who has found a process that will bring about new things he would not have thought of if he had not started to say them. That is, he does not draw on a reservoir. Instead, he engages in an activity that brings to him a whole succession of unforeseen stories, poems, essays, plays, laws, philosophies, religions, but wait! Back in school, from the first, when I began to try to write things, I felt this richness. One thing would lead to another. The world would give and give. Now, after 20 years or so of trying, I live by that certain richness. An idea hard to pin down, difficult to say, and perhaps offensive to some. For these are strange implications. One implication, of course, is the importance of just plain receptivity. Oh, I just love that. That openness to the world, of not writing from a position of bold sureness, of being able to ask questions, knowing that they may not have easy answers. I love that, and that openness to the world. That is some of the stuff that I really love about William Stafford. William Stafford was not a poet influenced particularly by the confessional voice, which is what I am now really drawn to myself. I guess William Stafford, right at the beginnings of sort of eco-poetry, that movement of poetry of place, he was a really important poet who wrote place and nature, and even that early type eco-type poetry. You can see why he would be so inspirational to people like, for example, Gary Snyder. But he was also a poet who was able to think theologically in a poem, maybe even a kind of thinking philosophically in a poem. He was able to do that. You know, his language is often very simple, very direct, you know, very much like Mary Oliver. So this is a poetry you can't rush. You know, if you read it quickly, you miss most of the joy, and it can seem to be very direct, very plain, maybe too simple. When you really slow down and read with the rhythm that the poem requires, there is a lot going on in a poem by William Stafford, and there's a lot of great beauty. For example, this work, The Way It Is, New and Selected Poems by William Stafford. It's the only collection, apart from the early poems, it's the only collection of his poetry that I have. I've always wanted to buy a collected to read the whole lot, and I don't know why I never have, because I love Stafford. But anyway, I do have this, New and Selected. This New and Selected was introduced by Naomi Shihab Nye, who was a great friend, great confidant of William Stafford. And William Stafford was a great supporter of her career in its early days. She's written this lovely introduction here, and listen to this. This is from Naomi Shihab Nye. This is one bit that she's written about the career and the poetry and why she loves the poetry of William Stafford. He befriended the earth and its citizens most generously and attentively, at the same time remaining solitary in his countenance, intact, composed, mysterious, complete in his humble service. There was in William Stafford and his poetry a profoundly refreshing, elemental life force which accepted good surprise and failure, exaltation and stumbling with nearly equal regard. That's just lovely, isn't it? It's a beautiful introduction by Naomi Shihab Nye. It's just lovely, beautiful introduction. I really enjoy reading that. I don't suppose I can introduce a poet really without reading some of their work. So what genre did they write is the second prompt, and I'm doing that. He wrote mainly poetry. He did also a little bit of memoir. He wrote essays, reviews, you know, all of that sort of thing. This is one poem that he wrote, for example, One Night. A voice within my shadow wakened me, a glowing voice. I love the dark too much. I cannot sleep. And there came for me again, one long away, her face as it shone in candlelight. That voice was always kind. It helped me now to rest in its long shadow. So much we loved the dark, it said, that all these years apart I have been here like this, hidden in your shade. Here's a poem called Mein Kampf. For me, you see, a least favourite book. this fascist ugliness. I don't think it would be a book I would ever be capable of reading. But here's what a humble, quiet person can do when they read something from a contrary point of view and respond to it with a lovely dignity. In those reaches of the night, when your thoughts burrow in, or at some stabbed interval, pinned by a recollection in daylight, a better self begs its hand out to you. That bitter tracery your life wove looms forth, and the jagged times haggle and excruciate your reaching palms again. A dull knife hurts most. Old mistakes come calling. No life happens just once. Whatever snags, even the edge of your days will abide. You are a turtle with all the years on your back. Your head stinks down into the mud. You must bear it. You need a thick shell in all that rain. How do you read a book with so much fascist ugliness in it and respond to it with such quiet dignity? It's a very, very attractive voice, isn't it? Oh my goodness. This is probably one of William Stafford's most famous poems, Travelling Through the Dark. Travelling through the dark, I found a deer dead on the edge of Wilson River Road. It is usually best to roll them into the canyon. That road is narrow. To swerve might make more dead. By glow of the tail light, I stumbled back of the car and stood by the heap. A doe, a recent killing. She had stiffened already, almost cold. I dragged her off. She was large in the belly. My fingers touching her side brought me the reason. Her side was warm. Her fawn lay there, waiting, alive, still, never to be born. Beside that mountain road, I hesitated. The car aimed ahead, its lowered parking lights. Under the hood purred the steady engine. I stood in the glare of the warm exhaust, turning red. Around our group I could hear the wilderness listen. I thought hard for us all, my only swerving, then pushed her over the edge into the river. Oh, he's able to handle that moral dilemma so well, isn't he? Which is interesting too, because William Stafford, it's an interesting voice. You know, he was a pacifist prepared to go to jail and stay true to his convictions than to go and fight, which would have been the easiest thing to do. I'm drawn to this because as a young Christian person, I know I wouldn't have had the conviction to stay true and to be a pacifist. You know, thou shalt not kill. You know, I would have signed up and gone to war. My social anxiety, I suspect, would have trumped everything else, and I just would have wanted to do the right thing. Yeah, but I don't think I would have had the conviction of someone like Bertrand Russell or James K. Baxter or William Stafford. But it's interesting, William Stafford, unfortunately, you know, he didn't really apply his pacifism to the non-human world. He was a hunter of animals, apparently. There are references in the memoir written by Kim of his father to his father hunting with rifle and bow and arrow. So it's interesting, isn't it, that he didn't really apply that pacifism to the non-human world. I guess he was not a vegetarian, like, for example, Bertrand Russell. It's interesting. Here's another beautiful poem. I might make this the last one because this video is getting a bit long. This is a poem called Waking at 3 a.m. Even in the cave of the night, when you wake and are free and lonely, neglected by others, discarded, loved only by what doesn't matter, even in that big room no one can see,
You push with your eyes till forever comes in its twisted figure 8 and lies down in your head. You think water in the river. You think slower than the tide in the grain of the wood. You become a secret storehouse that saves the country, so open and foolish and empty. You look over all that darkness, ripple across. More than has ever been found comforts you. You open your eyes in a vault that unlocks as fast and as far as your thought can run. A great snug wall goes around everything and always has been there, will always remain. It is a good world to be lost in. It comforts you. It is all right. And you sleep. That's just what I was talking about. That beautiful, quiet, gentle way, full of dignity. You know, that way that without even being self-conscious about what he's doing, the poem has a sense of walking through theology, of a real dignity in ideas and ways of being in the world, responding to the world. William Stafford, he's a voice that I really, really enjoy. I try and return to, as I said, every 5 to 10 years. I need to. You know, for me, he really is that reminder to be gentle, to be a little bit quiet, to listen, to be a little more filled with dignity. All qualities that I often really struggle with. You know, I can be a real tumult of turmoil. And it really upsets me afterwards, you know, when I cause squabbles or say the wrong thing or all of that sort of thing. William Stafford is a great presence for me, a great calming, quiet, dignified presence that for me is really good to return to. It's a very different poetic voice to my own, but that again is one of the reasons why I so cherish it. William Stafford. Where to start with them? Well, as I said, for me, if you want to start reading William Stafford, you start with the poetry. I wouldn't start with the essays or the reviews or anything like that. That book, if you wanted to start with William Stafford, you know, some people like to know a little bit about the person. This book, Early Morning, Remembering My Father, the memoir, the very intimate memoir of William Stafford by his son, Kim, after his death. That's a lovely place to start, actually. That would really help you know something about the person. You know, this calm, centered grace that he just exhibited, obviously, so beautifully. And there's some beautiful stuff here, too, about his marriage and, you know, the dignity, again, of that married expression, the expression of love. So this would be a great place to start, actually, in approaching the poetry, particularly if you struggle a bit with poetry and you don't read a lot of poetry. Maybe you could start with this real intimate memoir of William, Early Morning. That's a lovely place to start. And then, after you've read that memoir and you've got to know the man, then you could read the poetry, I guess. That might be a lovely place to start. I've got here some people that I can tag for this. Some of these people have already done at least one of these two tags, but hopefully I'm not going to annoy people by tagging them. And if they've done one, maybe they would be interested in doing the other. These are booktubers that I found particularly warm and welcoming. So there's Debs at Rainer Reads Stuff, which is a great channel name again. There's Gavin at Genre Books, Emily at the Linguist's Library. Oh, nobody does that considered look at language and literature like Emily does. If you want a really interesting channel, a really deep, considered approach to literary language and how it works, how it does its magic, I would really recommend Emily's channel. Then there's Kerry from Bookish Adventures in Wellbeing. What a great channel handle again. Then there's Meg, Books Off the Beaten Path. Ruben in To Readers It May Concern. David in David Novak Reads Poetry. Of course, another booktube channel I love. And there's Renee at Beyond Books. They're all channels that I find especially welcoming and warm. So I will tag all of those people and see if some of them would like to do this. I feel so glad for the welcome and being tagged by Arron and by C. Gregory. I love their channels. I love what they do, the way they've opened me up to new books and new voices. And if you're looking for some new channels to subscribe to, I really recommend both those channels. CG Rated Books and Aaron James Hook. They're great channel names and I really recommend them to you. This whole booktube thing and the tags is so welcoming and warm, and I'm just having I'm in poetic, in bookish bliss in being part of all of this. So thank you for this wonderful warm welcome. Thank you and bye for now.